We've got a new sponsor of the show that we'd like to thank, Subculture Group, South Florida, and our friend Rodney, for the best in culture, arts, and entertainment. The Subculture Group, from its restaurants, night spots, and coffee. You don't want to miss it, and you won't if you're in South Florida, because these are the places that we find ourselves hanging out at, and you will too. So thanks a lot. Well, welcome back for another episode. I'm really excited this week. We've got Jacaeber Kastor as our guest, probably one of the most interesting people we could have on our show. Jay, if I could give a little intro, is maybe one of the most important people in concert posters, but that would be not sufficient just to describe him as that, because he has so many areas that he's played in. Definitely a pioneer of psychedelic art, an entrepreneur. He moved from the West Coast to New York City. Um, Art dealer, art collector, really one of the pioneers of promoting major psychedelic and poster artists. Um, he's really done so much. Jay, why don't you go ahead? First of all, welcome, and why don't did I do a good job of introducing you,
Yeah,
or
pretty good.
what would you add to that?
Oh, well, let's see, I'm a fencer.
I think I knew
Um,
that actually. I think I knew that. We have a friend in common who maybe you had fenced with before. Zadig, is that right?
oh yeah, Zadok, and Zadok had the illustration, great illustration collector, a big fan of Corbin and a bunch of, yeah, Zadok's a very cool guy. Yeah, yeah.
People may know you from Psychedelic Solution, which I believe was one of the first, not only poster galleries in New York City or other, but also first psychedelic art gallery. Maybe you could describe it better than I'm doing right now.
Well, as far as I know, the first psychedelic art show was in 1965 here in New York City at a place called Coda Gallery. Coda didn't last too long, a couple few months, but they did have a pretty extensive psychedelic art show. It was kind of like what you'd call a pop-up nowadays. Um, but there's been, various attempts to kind of portray psychedelic art or show psychedelic art over the years, but I think maybe we were the first place to seriously categorize it as psychedelic art and make you know, an, a venue for related work in that area, and help define it in the 80s. So in a way, people think, oh, you were the first psychedelic art gallery. Yeah, probably so in terms of like, continuously operating for like 19 years in the space.
Yeah,
So.
that's amazing. And is there a way that you balance in terms of the psychedelic art or the poster art, or do they just kind of blend into each other? I mean, which do you consider yourself more into psychedelic art or into poster art?
Well, I, it's it's all it's all one big family. I mean, I just over the years, I suppose I kind of tried to think in terms of what's the core of my interest, and what got me started, I guess, was seeing some of the rock poster art that came out in the '60s in the area I grew up in. So that's what caught my attention because my mom is an artist, so I mean I was around a lot of art and saw a lot of art, but I was also a collector like a lot of kids are, just different, collected all kinds of little odds and ends. And when I saw the first advertisements for these, what was at the time kind of a psychedelic rock movement, psychedelic consciousness movement that was happening around 66, Um, they were exciting, a lot more interesting than say my baseball cards in terms of just looking at them. I'd been attracted to these collectible gum cards called ugly stickers. I don't know if
Sure.
you heard of them from around
Absolutely.
1965, Wally Wood and Basil Wolverton. I liked monster magazines. I liked, all the stuff like aliens and UFOs. I liked, like most kids, I liked all the unusual, weird stuff, Looney Tune cartoons, Mad Magazine. I guess my tastes were already, I was attracted to fringy, exciting stuff. So when I saw these posters, I, I, I was definitely intrigued and attracted. And obviously they were advertising a bunch of really good rock bands, and those bands and the concerts they put on were, exciting scenes. So there was that added element too that maybe you could get to one of the concerts, and then there's this crazy fun scene, with music and people dancing around and all this other stuff. So it was a little deeper. I mean, I guess with baseball cards, you go to a baseball game and you see, go see the Giants and watch Juan Marichal versus Sandy Koufax or something. You know what I mean? Some excitement there, but the that I got swept up into the only thing I knew about at the time, which was, they handed out these little flyers to advertise, and then the posters got posted up in store windows and phone poles and stuff. So that's how I got exposed to it. As to what those things were, that was a process, because there was also a lot of head shop. It was a morphing of what became the head shop industry at the time, because they always had sort of posters for students. I grew up near a big university campus, University of California, Berkeley. So there was always bookshops and coffee shops, and then there were also these posters that you could hang up on your walls. It was traditional, I think, for I don't know how far back it goes, but students would decorate their dorm rooms, and it was mostly art posters. Probably the kind of stuff people liked around that time, I think, ran towards surrealist artists and there'd be, Picasso, but also like Dali and so there was posters. There were occasionally very mild little social commentary things and stuff, but it was kind of a decorative poster market that was for and there was a big place that opened up near me called Print Mint, and they sort of specialized in that stuff. And as the rock poster thing started developing, so did the market for other types of decorative posters, for students and for just, putting in your room. It all kind of came in a big flood around 1966. So that's what I first got exposed to. But where you end up in life, I mean, that's your life quest. I mean, over the years, I've distilled it down. I mean, when I had the gallery, yeah, um, rock posters, I think, had the widest, broadest appeal. And there was a lot of people that collect rock posters. They're looking for material to put up in their homes or collect based on their favorite bands. And then there's other areas of interest that people have, and they look for posters in areas that they're interested in. Um, but so the rock posters definitely filled the collection plate, so to speak, but it wasn't necessarily the altar upon which I prayed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I assume one of the interesting things about posters is that you can collect based on the band, or you could collect based on the artist, because the posters were so good on their own that like you could just love the design and really not have any interest in the music. Or is that not something that you encountered?
Yes. It's the same way as the way I listen to music I don't know, people aren't like this, but I heard music as most of my life. I didn't really focus on the lyrics, heavily. I know have, especially it seemed like when I was a kid, girls always knew all the words to every song. I don't know if it was the same with boys, but a lot of songs, I just liked the way they sound and the mood they put me in, and I didn't know what they were saying. Um, and it was similar with the art. A lot of times, it was what I liked how it looked, and I didn't analyze it too much. It didn't matter what band was on it. I just loved the way the thing looked, and it put me in a mood. So I think I was attracted to things more for how they looked than exactly what they were. It's what they are is kind of an acquired taste. I think immediate impact was what I always excited me at the beginning, I think.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's kind of similar if you're listening to a song and you love, the beat of the drum or something, and you're not really focused on what the words are saying. And I guess there's kind of two schools of thought. One is that, the dumb are, amused by the drum or whatever. But I mean, I've always fallen into that category myself. Or you could get really into the message. But let me ask you, I mean, I know that in your personal collection, I mean, you're one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Jimi Hendrix collector in existence at one point, right? I mean, is that a fair thing to say?
At one point, yeah, with paper ephemera, probably. Yeah, I just it was with I think maybe by around the end of the '80s, beginning of the '90s, it was in the early mid '80s, it didn't really matter. You could collect almost anything, and just to your heart's content. There were other than maybe the Beatles, uh, there weren't that many competitive, crowded spaces for collecting. But by 1990 or so, there were a lot more collectors, and it was getting competitive. And like, for instance, you might be looking for certain things, and they get, bought out from under you, or other people want, you're competing. You became aware you're competing with other people for stuff. And it was getting hard to collect certain things because there were other very motivated individuals collecting various things. So I kind of said to myself one day, I mean, I like Jimi Hendrix's music, but I said to myself someday, well, I'm getting tired of just banging into all these other people because it's just driving the price of everything up. All the stuff I really want to collect, it's just getting crazy expensive. What could I collect that is too hard for people to collect? And I thought, Jimi Hendrix is a good one. It's just really hard to collect Jimi Hendrix. This stuff was scattered. This is before eBay or anything like that. There was no, how do you collect Jimi Hendrix stuff? It wasn't, the pieces that came up were few and far between. So I just thought this is going to be my little turf. I kind of wanted to carve out some turf for myself to have fun in. So that's how I kind of got into the Jimmy thing. Just and then I had to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to collect Jimi Hendrix? Because how do you do that? Especially just, there's not a Jimi Hendrix store or something, and there wasn't even the Jimi Hendrix estate was, still at that time, Alan Douglas was running it. It was an interesting, you know, and it was an interesting challenge. And yes, at one point I got to be probably the largest holder of Jimi Hendrix posters and other ephemera, meaning concert contracts, handwritten things he did, even photographs, albums, album covers, promotional stuff. It got into just it got to be a lot of stuff, but it was fun. I learned a lot about Jimmy, and I met all the people around his life. He was long passed away at that point, but
I want to ask you what influence New York City had on you. I mean, as you mentioned, you grew up in Berkeley. That's my alma mater. Being from the Bay Area, such a different atmosphere than New York City. But when I came out to New York City, boy, did it open my eyes, and it was such an amazing experience. What was that like for you, and how did that feed into kind of the you know, there's a there's a wall between fine art and the stuff that we love, but that wall has kind of crumbled a little bit more recently. But what was that like when you first started? Because when you think of a poster gallery, it's kind of almost like two different worlds in one. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that's like three questions rolled up in one. That's
Yeah.
pretty good. But the what you said about like gallery, yeah, that was one of my well, I was obviously trying to come up with some business ideas, and one of the ideas was that the venues where the kind of psychedelic posters that I was collecting came from, and the areas that they mostly were sold in, um, it was a little more head shoppy. And I thought, having moved to New York and kind of opened my eyes to larger kind of marketplace, a different way of doing things. It was less kind of provincial, little things on a grander scale. I started thinking, there's really an art aspect. If you separate it out, the sort of the more head shoppy side of the industry and kind of sort of I don't know, you know, funky drug addled hippies, you separate them sort of to one side and you sort of go back to your kind of core, more intellectual, um, Renaissance type hippies. I thought, well, there's material here. This could be looked at differently if you put this into a more of a art gallery setting. It's much more exciting than most of traditional graphic arts. I thought at least as exciting as some of the best graphic arts that I'd seen from around the world, meaning stuff like some of the, Japanese ukiyo-e or Polish, Eastern European, you know, movie posters, some of the French movie posters, some of the really beautiful. I thought it just needed a change of venue. So I thought, okay, let me this might be interesting. Maybe I can do it more as a gallery type of situation and see if I can find the artists that did a lot of these things. And maybe I could do shows of whatever they're doing now. And I could have like a shop where we have their posters, but we could show them as artists. What are they doing? Because these people are by and large artists, and I always felt, yeah, it was an upsetting little distinction. The way the world used to sort out graphic arts, it couldn't mix with fine arts, sort of. There was like little gray zones. I mean, MoMA kind of explores that, the world of, design versus quote unquote fine art. So there was that, but I thought, yeah, let me just see if I can upgrade the whole thing a little bit and present it in a different way. It was also later in time, I thought different place, different people, maybe they'll look at this field differently, you know. So that was one aspect of it. And you mentioned moving from Bay Area to New York. Yeah, I was pretty surprised actually. I mean, I just went out there to visit, take visit a friend, take a look around. I was pretty blown away by New York. It was really cool. I guess I was getting a little phased with the sort of new age aspects of the San Francisco Bay Area circa mid 70s. I got a degree in holistic health. I was involved with a lot of healers and new age people. I was studying all kinds of stuff like iridology, herbology. You know, I was interested in, past lives and, auras and all kinds of psychic phenomenon. I was listening to all the spiritual teachers and stuff. And then went out to New York to visit somebody, and I was like, oh, whoa, this is like Blade Runner or something. This place is just like decrepit, falling apart, monstrous city here, like with all this like, you know, noir kind of like passageways and interior spaces where, you can't possibly know this town just from walking around on the streets. It's just like infinite amount of interior spaces and I thought it was very interesting. And then when I moved out, it was very refreshing just to be in a place that was so different. I was really just exploring. I'm kind of a, like a lot of people, I get excited to go explore new stuff, where I don't know what I'm doing or where I am. And that was part of the excitement in New York.
From what I understand, you opened the gallery in '86 on Halloween. Does that sound right? Whether
Yeah, yeah. Basically, it was Halloween or the night before Halloween. I think it was like the night before Halloween, but it was, yeah. I was in that. I was trying to get that place ready for most of '86. I started earlier in the year, and then my contractor, I had saved up just enough money to maybe on a budget like renovate this space. And then the contractor ran out with about two-thirds of the money with about one-third of the work done. Guy just disappeared, and I was like, oh no, I never even everything about running that business was like complete nude. I had no experience. I didn't I wish I had taken some business courses or something. I had no experience at all. And just from day one, nothing went as expected. It was pretty crazy trying to get that place opened up. I was, sleeping on the floor there for quite a while because when the money was gone and the place had to get opened up, the only way I could figure it out was just like, okay, I have to do everything. I had one friend that helped me, and basically I had to finish the whole place up. Me and my friend, we got it done. It was crazy, I have to say.
so take us there. It's Halloween or the night before, 1986, and I believe your opening night show was for an artist that I love, probably my favorite of the kind of like psychedelic or poster art in general, Rick Griffin. And you're
Yeah,
having this show. I mean, tell what was it like? What?
well, looking back, I mean, I made some good moves too. Um, I've always had a very exciting life full of I've had a lot of big failures, splashy failures, and I've also had some really, splashy successes. And I'll tell you, you know, when I met Rick out in San Francisco, uh, it really helped. I just knew that that was the way to open, that he was the guy I wanted to open the gallery with. And it didn't take long to convince him to do the show because he really wanted to come out to New York too. So he was excited about doing the show, and we planned it for a good while. Most of the time I was putting the gallery together, stuck with all that work. We were, you know, so we had time to think about putting together some new merchandise to sell, filtering through all his stuff to figure out what we are gonna sell, what we are gonna show. Um, it was like I guess it's the same a little bit with bands when they put out their first album, I've heard. They've got like years and years of material they've worked on and honed, and a lot of times people's first album comes out really good because they've just got their best stuff and things that they're so familiar with. And then if it's a success, they get pushed to put another one out right away. And it's like, oh crap, we have to write new stuff immediately. And it's not the same. It's like it's rushed. It's like, but this show we had a good amount of time to plan it and put it together. Um, and Rick ended up staying for a long time. He stayed for like a month. I felt so bad for Ida. His wife would call up and like, "Where's Rick? Is he coming back home? Like, where's like, And I'd be like, yeah, as far as I know, But I mean, I'll tell him you called. I'll get him to call you. But uh, the opening was really good. It was we put posters up all over town. Because I one of my ideas was I wanted to hey, I got a gallery. We get to make posters like the stuff that I loved. We get to make posters and then use them because I didn't want to make stuff just to sell it. It was supposed to do a job. I always kind of like the idea of what a poster is. It's got a job to do. So we printed up a lot of Rick's poster, and of course I didn't know at the time that it was easier to print posters that you're going to post on the wall on thinner stock. They tend to put them up with glue in Europe, and here they call it fly posting. You get a roller and you got this stuff that's a little bit like paper mache paste, and you roll it on and you put the poster up and you roll some more over it, and uh, you had to know what the right stuff to use was because it dries clear. Um, but I didn't know any of that at the time. So I printed the posters like on a nice heavier stock because I was thinking, they were going to sell these posters too, and you want to have a nice poster to have. And then I didn't know how to put them on the walls, so we bought spray tack from art supply store, and we were spray tacking the posters up and putting them on the walls of like all over town, these construction sites and stuff, um, which basically worked to get them up. But somebody told me at the opening, I think it was, they were like, "That was so thoughtful of you to put the posters up with spray tack." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Oh, because you could just take them right off." I was like, I was incredible. I was like, I saw the poster and I really wanted it. And I was prepared to have to like, cut it off with my pocket knife and peel the poster off the wall, like how you would normally try to get a poster off in New York City, and it'd probably have pieces of other posters stuck to the back. And he said it just came right off. And I was like, "It did?" And he was like, "Yeah, it was, you intended that, didn't you?" And I was like, But I don't think they stayed up very long. They may have fallen off or people took them, but there was a lot of stuff like that that was uh, you know uh, learned by experience. Like I said, it was a really great show. Didn't know what we were doing. Had a lot of stuff up. A lot of people showed up. It was good. I had a lucky break. I made friends with a guy named Carlo McCormick. He was at the time I he was a writer for Art Forum. Um, and I was, I liked reading reviews of art shows in Art Forum, and this seemed to be one of the only guys that dealt with kind of the sort of fringier art that I was interested in. So I wrote an angry letter to Art Forum complaining about the narrow scope of most of the commercial gallery scene in New York City, and even institutional art, uh, and just said, what does a guy got to do to get a break around this town, for people to look at anything different, and it was same thing. I didn't know how to write a letter back then either, so I think I wrote like 11 page, a little bit mean and angry because I was like I was broke at that point, and it had to work the whole thing because I ran out of money trying to get the place ready, and like I was really in quite a position, it's kind of like it had to work, and so I wrote this angry letter, and just before the opening, a guy came by the gallery and rang the doorbell, and I was like, they said, "Oh, it's Carlo McCormick," and I was like, "Oh shit." I was like, "Oh, I'm in trouble now." So I opened the door for the guy, he came up, and I was like, "Oh, dude, he's got like this like orange hair down to his butt." And I was like, "Oh man, this is not who I expected this guy to be." He was like holding the letter. He was like, "Man, this is the best letter I ever read." He was like, "Can I come in and take a look around?" And I was like, anyway, Carlo was a great supporter of the place and helped me figure out how to get the word out to the press because Carlo knew all about, he knew all the writers, and he had a lot of really great ideas of how to immediately start penetrating into New York in a way that I probably wouldn't have figured out for years. So there were a lot of fortuitous things that happened with that gallery. Also, how shall I put this delicately? I'd been a very enthusiastic uh, party um, goer uh, because the club scene in New York really interested me, and I know I did it to excess, but a lot of the fun people, that was the whole point in the '80s was excess. There was an excess of excess. shall I say, going on at that point. So I met a lot of interesting people in the trenches in New York City. So we had some other amazing breaks too. Like I knew people, I'd partied with people from MTV, which had just sort of was in its nascent period. They were just starting up this thing called MTV News, and they had no clue what to put on it, because there's only so much rock news or rock was dominant still at that point in the 80s. It hadn't switched over to hip hop and beyond. So they thought the idea of a lot of the rock concerts, the rock side of our business appealed to them, directly because some of these artists that we were showing did work for, album cover art, et cetera, et cetera. So they just started running it on MTV also, running the openings and stuff. It got out of hand really quick. I mean, I was kind of lucky like that, but we weren't really prepared too. So if you've ever been in a situation like that where something starts snowballing, it's I mean, that's everybody's goal, right? Is to have their business go viral or whatever. But it's also like a crazy thing because you're not necessarily prepared, and you don't know what to expect. It's pretty hard to harness it and utilize the force that comes at you. New York City's a big, big place. Things can come at you large.
No, I mean, it seems to me that you had picked such a great viral or attractive subject matter, having a poster gallery, a psychedelic art poster gallery in New York City, that regardless of what your strategy was, you were going to hopefully attract a lot of people just with the concept that would help you on that journey. And I would think that would be something that would be very likely just because of what it was. I mean, who wouldn't want to hitch their wagon to what you were doing and try to help put it forward? I mean, it's a very cool thing, I would think. I mean,
I never really knew what people would like. I've only been able to figure out what I liked, and I hope, you hope it'll work. I was pretty uh what's the word, myopic. Just I really there's been some elements of luck. It's fascinating how a lot of the stuff that I got into ended up getting big. You know, I I don't know that I'm any kind of a taste maker. I just think I got into things that at certain times that looking backwards, it was a good time to get into a lot of the things I got into. I just followed my heart. I didn't. These were things that are interesting to me. It's fascinating. I mean, because I grew up. Um, we didn't have a lot of money, but my mom's parents had some money. So she didn't have a lot of money because she kind of moved far away from them and was like this little rebellious kind of beatnik artist. So she didn't get the benefits of like her sort of heritage so much because she was a little bit of a black sheep. So we grew up more on the modest, like lower middle class side, but we had enough. You know what I mean? I didn't want for food. I didn't, I had clothes. I mean, back then they just told you to go outside, like, we were bit, we could, I didn't have like a desperation within me about like, oh my God, I need to be a doctor or a lawyer or something to make money. In the area I grew up in, having money wasn't stressed. And nobody ever really talked about that. People were into being cool or intellectual was valued heavily. I never saw a lot of praise or adulation being heaped on anybody just because of their money. So I never thought about what should my career be like. It was always more about like what's interesting? What do I want to do? What's interesting? Well, follow my heart, follow my curiosity. So the things I've gotten into have always been about stuff that's interesting. And I guess I've lucked out that I've somehow been able to turn them into a business too.
Let's go through some of the artists because they're so interesting. And at the end of the day, all this poster art and psychedelic art is made by artists. We mentioned Rick Griffin. I mean, what's your thoughts on him? Maybe some people aren't familiar with his art. How would you describe not Rick as the person, but as the artist?
Wow. Well, Rick is the artist. He's surprisingly hardworking. Most of the time, I believe he would come up with a concept and he'd flesh it out. He really worked from like ideas. He'd come up with a concept and he was very diligent. His work in the finished state looks very fresh and bold, and it's hard to imagine that he went to a lot of work to get there. But um, I got to know a little bit about his work process and watch him in action, and he put a lot of planning and steps in. He would make drafts, he would make sketches, he would refine it, think about it. Sometimes he'd literally be tormented. I don't think people ever, you know, got to see too much of that side of him. He would get tormented. Sometimes he'd have so many drafts of something, but he had a like chasing something that he could kind of divine how it was supposed to come out. He occasionally would do commercial jobs for people that were probably more towards what they were asking for, but the whole movement in the mid 60s was to co-opt these commercial jobs and give them respect, get them done in a way that was appropriate for the product for the job. I mean, Rick was a real commercial artist, like he didn't do a lot of fine art type projects. He told me at one point that you know, there usually has to be a goal and a paycheck involved to get him to get him going on a project. But the game back then was to sort of co-opt the final product with imagery, personalized imagery. So he could get the job done, but maybe do it in a theme that was of interest to him, maybe using characters or styles that were something that was interesting to him. It got to a point in the maybe around 68 where posters and things became unrecognizable in terms of what they were actually saying or what they were actually advertising. It got so artist oriented that the art of the artist really overtook the message of the poster. You know what I mean? I mean, there's been a movement in a lot of areas like that. You know what I mean? There was a point when people doing sports were just sort of slaves to the owners and the teams and all that. And of course, nowadays, sports stars are huge entities of their own. The people are almost more interested in their opinions and how they dress and what they do and their flamboyant style of playing or whatever is equally as important as their being like a member of a team or something. And it got like that with artists. So, at the beginning, like people were just like art slaves, but the sort of creativity was stressed more in the late 60s. And Rick was an early proponent of that. um, he saw what was happening and I think gravitated in that direction. A lot of his early work was with Surfer magazine, and they gave him a lot of latitude. His buddy John Severson, who owned the magazine, really liked him and liked his cartoons that he did. Um, and he got a lot of latitude, which you can see the format of his early work was more standard cartoony strip format. And as time went on, uh, and I think probably also as people started smoking more pot, which pot was a big influence in the graphic arts scene, really in the mid 60s, it started moving, I think out of jazz circles and getting into some of the creative arts and stuff. But Rick got a lot of latitude with that job. And then when he started seeing what was going on with the poster art, especially what like Wes Wilson was doing up in San Francisco, I think he was very attracted to that and the freedom of it. And he was fell very hard for the sort of Wild West style that was being employed up in San Francisco. So he loved that kind of, cowboys and Indians kind of look of a lot of the work that was being done on posters. It was like a decor style almost, around 66. You'll notice a lot of the rock posters from in San Francisco have that old-timey Wild West look, different themes like that. Rick loved that stuff. So it spoke to him. So he really enjoyed, decorating the pieces up like they were very Wild West oriented. And I kept saying Rick's work by 67, 68, I think they were all starting to see it really in mid 67 that they were allowed to go farther, and I think the artists were sort of egging each other on a little bit. They knew the other poster artists, and there was a little bit of a back and forth repartee kind of thing going on, like check out what, oh my God, look what Rick did this week. Oh, maybe like I could get a little wilder. Oh, I could, oh, look what Victor Moscoso did. Maybe I could, amp up my colors a little bit more. Oh, maybe I could like look at Rick's lettering. Like, oh my God, that's like insanely cool. Like, let's, maybe I could up my game on my lettering a little bit. But the artists were kind of almost a little competitive, I think. And by 68, it just was like, oh my God, people were just doing like almost like whatever art they wanted to do, and just, oh yeah, like I'll put there's a band being advertised for this press. They would slide that in, like, let me, you know, I mean, it's kind of like chicken or egg. I guess it's also like the way people write music. Do you work off the lyrics or do you work off the musical part first? Who does, how do you build, build that type of thing? But Rick, Rick's work became more and more indulgent. And as he got to be a little bit of a star, if you were going to do a job with Rick, that's what you were looking for. You were asking for Rick to kind of do Rick. So he got to do more and more things, like literally the way he got to drive the imagery, and I think it got more exciting for him.
What about Robert Crumb?
Well, Crumb is kind of I was going to say a little bit of a sui generis kind of story, but I think the ultimately what drove Crumb's popularity is his drawing technique. He's got shall I say, it's funny, almost like a humble line that he works with. His lines weren't, unlike Rick, for instance, who would distill stuff down to like clean and bold lines. It was a kind of a big thing that, a bunch of artists, Mad Magazine artists and some of the people were going that way. It was there's a history of graphic designers that did that. But Crumb was kind of also a pioneer of like the human line. It could be wavery, it could be a little irregular. You were aware that this is like a human being just drew this thing. It's not like slick. It's like there's a homey element, a personal element to it. And yet he had amazing knack for capturing nuances of people's body language, nuances of their facial expression, angles. Um, you know, I'm thinking like, egg on Sheila, but it's like, um, the perspectives that Crumb used on close-ups of people and things. It was all very innovative. And I think, for instance, what I liked about Crumb when I first saw his work was just looking, like I said, I wasn't so much what the stories were. I liked how it looked. It kind of it looked, it was kind of a fresh. And then if you started reading his stories, the guy, when I first became exposed to him in the 60s, he had a real wacky sense of humor. He was really far out. As time went on, he became more of a, I don't know, kind of a psychoanalytical guy, like, you know, c- concerned with all aspects of his uh, sort of complicated psyche and his, self-analyzing. It was a, I'll tell you, self-analysis and the whole uh, Gestalt movement, the self-help, the encounter groups, like analyzing ourselves and trying to like, you know, it was really big. He sort of foreshadowed that whole, introspective movement that was that really just blew up big in the 70s, where people were like became super fascinated with all of their flaws. And people used to sit around in a room and just have these like encounter groups where you'd just pick each other's personality apart and just try to get it down to like these raw things. And I think Crumb like mined a lot of the kind of raw emotions and the raw core of our existence at that time, and it was fresh. So, could go on all day about where Crumb went and this and that, but that's what I noticed about him, at least in the early days.
Well, what's interesting about Crumb is that he kind of is one artist in particular who bridges that gap, that kind of wall between fine art and popular culture, because some of the collectors and institutions who collect Crumb, um, it almost like gives hope to the other subversive artists that one day they too will be collected by the fine art establishment. Does that sound true to you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't, his work doesn't read to me fine arty at all. And he, of course, makes fun of fine art over and over again in some of his work. But it's the undeniable intellectual content, and he's very controversial because he turns out to be, I don't know how to put it, but just a very conflicted guy with a lot of attitudes and habits that upset people. It's he wasn't designed to be some kind of uh, you know example, like a good example, uh, like kids, here's a great way to live your life or whatever. I mean, but it's just that his kind of dedicated drive to kind of look at himself with warts and all. It's hard to put that in the category of commercial art. It just doesn't really, it's hard to put that in the category of simply comics. It's not just, fiction. It's, um, he's hard to lump in. So he has been adopted by a lot of gallerists and a lot of fine art people. Just, you know, became fascinated with his work, and he has made inroads in other areas. But it's funny because his work isn't particularly, similar to most fine art per se. And so he's been great in the sense that, yeah, he has has helped erode the definition between, that was always so strict between, oh, this is graphic arts, so this is fine arts, this is just storytelling. This is, some grand, investigation into larger issues. He helped blur the borders of that. As the interest in him, especially.
Why do you think that is? Does it have to do with who, kind of high profile collectors, or as you mentioned, kind of the human nature of his line, or what do you think it was about his art in particular? Because someone like Griffin, a very different artist, uh, you could argue hasn't bridged it as well as someone like Crumb. Um,
Well, Griffin's stuff was undeniably graphic, but the subject matters that fascinated him, all of the symbolism and his Rick had this like burning quest to kind of see, to engage with life's mysteries, and the where it's almost like the Da Vinci Code or something. Like what's what happened in history, and how did the modern thought get to be where it is now, and what relationship can you have with the higher forces? Rick was like a spiritual quester, so his stuff comes off as um, very graphic arty, but there's this overarching um, spiritual energy behind it that's undeniable. Whereas Crumb, it's it comes off very intellectual, and so it's sort of in the format of comics, but it's like a intellectual, but actually I think it appeals to people's, you know, how do I put this? It appeals to people's, you know, the gossip, the dirt, the fascination with the foibles of humanity. It's not like he's appealing to like the great spiritual quest in life. It's more of like it's sort of the opposite. He comes off intellectual, but it's ultimately kind of like the fascination people have with like like a Jerry Springer show or something. Like there's like, you know what I mean? There's it's really the dirt. Like he takes the intellectuals and gives them some dirt. Gives them some like, let's get down and like, we're going to get down in the and down and dirty here. It's like it's exciting like that. It's like whereas Rick's almost like the opposite. It's that they both cross sort of genres in a certain way.
is it fair to say that both your art show in the gallery of Griffin and the art show that you did for Crumb were some of the first gallery shows that those artists ever did?
Well, they'd done some shows. I don't think they were the first gallery shows, but it was maybe the venue, getting them in New York City, and but they'd had some every 5 or 6 years. I don't think Crumb did too many shows at that point. He had a buddy at Gotham Bookmart that he did a show up there, and they had some because of Zap Comics, they did some shows for Zap Comics at a few places. They were they were getting some action. They weren't really being considered you know like I mean Rick did shows. Rick did some shows in LA. They weren't, it wasn't really like some of the like Rick's friend Ed Ruscha or whatever, like some of the artists where they have shows like museum shows and gallery shows on a regular schedule. You look at their CV and it's like boom 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 boom. But they had they were different, some different shows they had, but in their realm you didn't necessarily get gallery shows. I mean with Crumb, I mean when it was David Zwirner, but before Zwirner, I'm trying to think of the guy who was up on 23rd Street. They started doing regular shows for him, and that's, you know, there's another guy, Andrew Edlin, who put on some shows. The Zap Comics started having a show, every issue that came out, and I think that kind of helped stimulate it a little bit. But they're not really showing artists per se. I mean, now, of course, probably could, it's not at all out of the question. Crumb gets some regular shows all the time, right?
Well, Jay, it's been a pleasure to have you here. And I feel like we're just getting warmed up. I mean, we could go for a really long time, but I want to be respectful of your time. But thank you so much for coming and sharing a little bit about your experiences. We'd love to have you back another time if you have any interest. But thank you very much. We want to thank Subculture, our sponsor, and thank you for tuning in.
You're very welcome. Have me back anytime. It was a lot of fun talking with you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Terry.
Jay.